Have you ever looked at your paycheck deductions or maybe the tax line on a shopping receipt and wondered, exactly where does that money go? But more than that, have you ever thought about how the money leaving your wallet literally steers the entire global economy? Well, let's get right into it. In this explainer, we're giving you a clean, accurate, and totally direct look at fiscal policy. We're going to map out exactly how governments collect their cash, how they spend it, and how those massive financial levers speed up or slow down the economy we all live in. So here is our roadmap for the explainer. First, understanding types of taxation. Second, budgets, deficits, and surpluses. Third, what is fiscal policy? Fourth, expansionary versus contractionary policy. Fifth, the multiplier effect. And finally, number 6, limitations of fiscal policy. Let's hit it. Section 1, understanding types of taxation. Where does the government get its money? Okay, before we can even talk about how a government spends money to influence the economy, we really need to understand how they collect the funds to run the country in the first place. Think about it for a second. Where does the government actually get its money? Well, it comes from us, from you, from businesses, from trade. Whether it's the taxes pulled directly out of your hard-earned paycheck before you even see it, poof, gone, or those extra few bucks added to the receipt when you buy a new laptop. Taxation is absolutely the main engine of government revenue. But as you probably know, not all taxes are collected the same way. Okay, let's dive into this. We basically have 2 main buckets of taxation, direct and indirect. Now, a direct tax is one you literally cannot pass on to anyone else. It hits your income or a company's profits directly. Think of your personal income tax or corporate tax. You owe it, you pay it directly to the government. Simple. An indirect tax, on the other hand, is levied on goods and services. The manufacturer or the retailer actually pays the tax to the government, but, and here's the kicker, they transfer that cost right to you, the consumer, by baking it into the final price of the product. Things like value-added tax or VAT and excise taxes on fuel are perfect examples here. Now, what's really crucial here is how these different tax systems actually impact different income brackets in society. We generally look at 3 systems. A progressive tax, like the income tax we just mentioned, means the burden increases right along with your income. Higher earners pay a larger percentage. Then you have a proportional or flat tax, which just takes the exact same percentage from everyone across the board. But take a look at the regressive system. Pretty much all indirect taxes, like a uniform 20% VAT on everyday goods, are considered regressive. Why? Well, if everyone pays the exact same flat amount of tax on a loaf of bread, that specific amount represents a much larger, disproportionate chunk of a low-income earner's total wealth compared to someone who is wealthy. Section 2. Budgets, deficits, and surpluses, the government checkbook. Right, so now that we know how the government fills up its coffers, what do they actually do with all that collected tax revenue? Just like a standard household budget, a government has to balance what comes in against what goes out. If they bring in exactly what they spend, boom, balanced budget. But let's be real, that's incredibly rare. What's far more common is what we see here. A budget deficit happens when government spending is strictly higher than its revenue. A budget surplus is the exact opposite. Revenue actually exceeds spending. Now, surpluses are great. They can fund long-term infrastructure or act as a rainy day fund for economic shocks. Deficits, though? Deficits require borrowing. And to put that into perspective, just look at the sheer scale of government borrowing we're talking about here. 132 billion pounds. That staggering number was the projected budget deficit for the UK government for the 2023 to 2024 fiscal year. Basically, their planned spending on things like public services, state pensions, debt interest, it was expected to hit roughly 1,189 billion pounds. But revenues? Only projected at 1,058 billion. That is a massive shortfall that has to be financed somehow, usually by borrowing from domestic households, private firms, or even foreign entities. And you better believe that borrowing has real-world consequences. First off, running a deficit adds to the overall national debt, which means future generations are stuck paying it off with interest, usually through, you guessed it, higher taxes. Second, it creates a massive opportunity cost. Every dollar spent paying off past debt is a dollar that can't be spent on hospitals or schools today. But the third point is super fascinating, especially for economists. It's called the crowding out effect. When governments borrow these massive sums of money, they can actually drive up interest rates. This makes loans way more expensive for everyday consumers and private businesses, effectively crowding out private sector investment and slowing down economic growth. Section 3. What is fiscal policy? Steering the economy. So, we've set the stage with taxes and budgets. But what happens when a government actively uses these tools to manage the economy? Well, that's fiscal policy in a nutshell. It's the overarching decisions a government makes regarding its spending and taxation, intentionally designed to influence aggregate demand and overall economic growth. You can think of it as the ultimate steering wheel. It's the biggest lever a government can pull to speed up a sluggish economy or hit the brakes on an overheated one. To really grasp just how powerful this is, let's look at this foundational macroeconomic equation. Total or aggregate demand in an economy equals household consumption plus firm investment plus government spending plus net exports. Now, fiscal policy directly controls that government spending variable, obviously. But through taxation, it also heavily influences household consumption and business investment. So by tweaking just taxes and spending, a government can effectively manipulate almost every single variable in this equation to steer the nation's total output. It's incredibly powerful stuff.
Section 4. Expansionary versus contractionary policy. The gas and the brakes.
Okay, so how do they actually use those levers in practice? Let's contrast the two main strategies. Expansionary policy is stepping on the gas. The goal? Boost economic growth. The government does this by increasing spending, lowering taxes, or honestly, a bit of both. This pumps fresh money into the economy, increasing purchasing power and driving up total demand. On the flip side, contractionary policy is hitting the brakes. The goal here is usually to keep runaway inflation in check. So the government decreases spending and raises taxes. This essentially pulls money out of the economy, declining purchasing power and cooling down that aggregate demand. Let's see how this plays out with a couple of specific examples. Say a government rolls out an expansionary policy like cutting the corporation tax. Suddenly, firms have higher net profits. This directly incentivizes them to increase their investment, which drives up total demand across the economy. Conversely, what if the government wants to run a contractionary policy? Well, they might slash government spending in their budget. Instantly, that means less demand for goods and services from government contracts, which leads to less income for private firms, lower output, and an overall decrease in total economic demand to help cool off that inflation. Now, to put a real-world scale on this, look at this massive figure, 100 billion Singapore dollars. This was the expansionary stimulus implemented by the Singapore government back in 2020. During the COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns, when consumption and investment literally plummeted overnight, the government stepped hard on the gas. They injected $100 billion to boost government spending, subsidize wages, and basically save businesses from closing their doors forever. By actively shifting that aggregate demand curve to the right, they essentially bought economic survival until the country could safely reopen. Section 5. The multiplier effect. The ripple of spending. But here is the secret to why governments absolutely love expansionary spending. It's called the multiplier effect. It's this amazing phenomenon where the final impact on aggregate demand is actually significantly greater than that initial injection of government cash. It's not a simple one-to-one ratio. A single government stimulus creates this wild chain reaction of economic activity as the money bounces around the economy. Let's walk through how this builds step by step. We're going to take a pretty dense academic concept and turn it into a clear visual chain reaction. Step 1, the government injects new spending. Say they decide to build a massive new highway. Step 2, the construction workers get paid, which gives national income a nice initial boost. Now, step 3 is where the magic happens. Those workers now have higher disposable income. For every additional dollar they earn, they spend a fraction of it on groceries, haircuts, you name it. Economists call this the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. The larger the MPC, the more they spend. And step 4, the local grocer and the barber suddenly have no income, right? So they go out and spend a fraction of their new money. This creates a massive ripple effect, meaning that initial money spent on the highway ends up increasing the total aggregate demand by a much larger multiple. Section 6, limitations of fiscal policy, why it doesn't always work. I know, it sounds perfect in theory, right? Just spend some money and watch it multiply like magic. But why doesn't fiscal policy always work exactly as planned? Well, here are the major roadblocks. First, you have significant time lags. It takes months just to pass a budget and even longer for that spending to actually hit the real economy. Second, that beautiful multiplier effect we just talked about, it can completely shrink if consumer confidence drops. During a severe recession or a panic, consumers might just hoard their stimulus money out of fear instead of spending it. That means a super low marginal propensity to consume, which heavily dulls the policy's effectiveness. Third, there's a huge opportunity cost. If a country drains its past national reserves to fund a stimulus today, they literally have fewer resources to fight the next crisis. And lastly, today's debt almost always means tomorrow's taxes. Which leads us perfectly to our final thought. Expansionary fiscal policy can absolutely be a lifeline for an economy in crisis. It provides jobs, saves businesses, prevents total collapse. But it is never free. If today's budget deficit inevitably becomes tomorrow's tax increase, we really have to ask ourselves, are the immediate benefits of today's stimulus truly worth the financial burden we are placing on the taxpayers of tomorrow? It's an incredibly delicate balancing act of the government checkbook, and the ripple effects absolutely dictate the future of our global economy. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the world around you.